Huge class.
Use the mic, Bird, will you?
No, I will. I'm just talking now. Mumbling. Okay. Look, it's great. It's great once again to be here. One of my favorite places to talk with well-informed and a very well-informed, alert audience, and that makes a lot of difference, particularly after I've just come from teaching. Did anyone see the editorial in the last couple of days by Timmerman or something about complaining about the teachers were making it far too hard on students?
Yeah.
They really needed to take their customers into account and slack off on the amount of work they were assigning, because students couldn't get the rest of their activities in if they actually had to work. I'm not making this up.
No. And he was serious.
I thought it was satire, and then it turned out that it wasn't. So, we've all lived through, in this room, most everyone has lived through 40, 50 years of Kansas politics. And although we certainly, and many people in this room have contested elections and worked hard for various candidates over the years, I would argue, as a student of Kansas politics, that from when modern Kansas government was created, which is really in the late 1960s, early 1970s, so around 50 years ago, we've been governed by a moderate to conservative set of politicians, mostly Republicans with some Democrats, but the Democrats have been, relatively moderate and sometimes quite conservative. My friend Al Sigler reminds me of Bob Docking, and Bob was many things. He was a Democrat, but he certainly was no liberal. And even Kathleen Sebelius, whom people want to present as this very liberal politician, was pretty much a pro-business Democrat in various ways. You could argue about whether we've been well governed or not in that, and about the particular policies. But we're not California, we're not New York, we're not Washington State, and we're certainly not Mississippi. We're somewhere there. We're Kansas, and I think we got pretty much the government the Kansans wanted. Over the last 20 years, the Republican Party in Kansas has become, obviously, if I use the word conservative, I don't mean it in any complimentary way. Because I'm a big fan of real conservatism, of conserving what's good, and being slow to change sometimes. And so I think we should have that argument about being progressive, being conservative. But we're really talking about the right-wing takeover of the Republican Party, gradually over the last 20 years, and then in one fell swoop in 2010. You have the Kansas legislature becoming very, very Republican, the House. You had the governorship going to Sam Brownback, who ran on a platform of being small government, social conservative, going to make Kansas into this model small government state. And honestly, I think anyone who's looked at Kansas politics assumed that he was coming back to Kansas from the U.S. Senate to run for president via the becoming governor and turning us into a small government nirvana. 2012, the move to the right was complete as Governor Brownback and his allies took out 7 out of 8, 7 out of 9, depending on how you count, moderate Republican senators, but they really weren't very moderate. Dick Kelsey, if you know him, not a moderate at all. Steve Morris from Western Kansas, not really a moderate. But traditional Republicans, they took him out. And now you have the Senate and the House being very conservative, yet Sam Brownback, obviously, being far to the right. So that gets us to 2014. And it's I'd make three observations, or two observations to start with. First of all, it's an exceptional year, and secondly, it's an important year. These obviously go together. It's exceptional because we really are a red state. I know we're in Lawrence, there's a little blue dot, Wyandotte sometimes, but we're basically the blue dot in a flyover red state. And so it's exceptional that you have not just one race, the governor's race, which we've seen on the horizon for quite a while, but a Senate race and now a Secretary of State's race that are truly competitive. Indeed, if the election were held today, as they say, probably all three of those incumbents, Brownback, Roberts, and Kobach would lose. So that makes it exceptional in many ways, just a spectator sport. And you do start watching things a little more closely when you think, that's interesting. But far more than it being an exceptional year, it's an important year. It's important largely because of the governor's race. And the Secretary of State's race is not insignificant. The Senate race is important in its own way. We'll talk about all of those. But it's really most significant by far because of the governor's race. So what I want to do today is talk about what's going on and maybe a bit about why, and then open it up for questions about Kansas politics. We take some national questions, but really Kansas is pretty damn interesting. So now I'm going to focus on the governor's race, the Senate race, and the Secretary of State. But below that radar is the battle for seats in the Kansas House of Representatives. The Senate's not up this year. 2012 gave us a 4-year Senate terms. So the Senate's not going to change. And it's very, very right-wing. But House races, and I'd love to talk about House races. I think they're interesting. I think they're important. And I talk to people who know a lot about these all the time, and they just throw up their arms. I mean, it's hard to generalize about them. By and large, I think your metric ought to be if Davis wins, Democrats should pick up some seats. Moderate Republicans have already done very well. They beat back conservative challenges in the primaries. And so the Kansas House should be somewhat more, to maybe a fair amount more moderate. But honestly, nobody can really track that. And the other thing here is that had Democrats been able to recruit better candidates in some of these seats, they might be doing even better. Very hard to recruit legislative candidates, even in seats that show some promise. So in a sense, when you've done poorly, there's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, gee, we can't win, so I won't think about running for the Kansas House. When in fact, particularly this year, you might be able to win. Anyway, I think that the exceptional notion of this year is that both history and current politics make it this way, as does the elevation of the Secretary of State's race to near major status. I really think that that race is starting to get some national attention. There was a national story today about the Kobach race. And let's just think about this. Paul Davis, 42 years old, minority leader, known well to his family. And some people in Topeka, but really not known very well. decided that he wanted to run for governor quite some time ago. I have no idea exactly when, but he's been planning on this for a while. And he knew that he was a liberal, quote liberal, defined at least, as a liberal Lawrence lawyer. You know, from the day he decided that he'd look at this. Of course he would. He would be. So, I mean, the fact that someone from Lawrence may well be the next governor of the state is really remarkable. Probably the most difficult town to run from as a Democrat in the state. You're immediately labeled, regardless of your record. The fact that you live, you know, in this blue community. So that's pretty remarkable. Greg Orman, you know, probably no savior, probably someone who, you know, we would all have some issues with in one way or another. And I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know how much he's going to spend on him. The fact is he's leading Pat Roberts on a head-to-head basis in the last poll by 10 percentage points. Pat Roberts is 34%, an incumbent senator. So, I mean, Greg Orman, that's exceptional. And we'll find out more about Greg Orman. We'll find out what Pat Roberts wants to tell us about him. And we'll find out, you know, a little. So, but it really is remarkable. And then we've talked about the Secretary of State race and talked about Chris Kobach. But you've got the idea that Gene Schodorf, a former Republican House member and senator, is now a Democrat and is leading or neck and neck with Kobach, is truly exceptional. And I don't want to piss anybody off here, that's a technical term, but she's not a very good candidate. She could, on her own, she can barely raise a dime. These are not, you know, opinions, these are, you know, talking to people within the Democratic Party. Very nice person. I like Jean. I think she'd be a good Secretary of State. But really, much like Brownback, this is a referendum on Chris Kobach. And Gene Schodorf has to demonstrate that she's competent. I think she has. But we're not talking about a really charismatic candidate here. And yet she's either leading or tied in the polls. And finally, this notion of the national attention we're getting is really remarkable. It's kind of fun. It does take away from my day job up there. But it's important, to get to the importance, I think we're talking about our election that's important in three ways. First of all, and legions beyond the other two races' importance is the governor's race. And with Sam Brownback's, you know, real life experiment in Kansas. And that's what he called it, a real life experiment. He's backed off from that. He hates the idea of being called a real life experiment. But he called it that. And so we're the guinea pigs here. Now Davis's reward, if he wins, will be 2 of the worst years that any politician will ever spend in any state. He's got a Senate that won't go along with him, a House that will be probably a little better, but still run by Republicans, run by people who do not want Paul Davis to succeed in any way possible. So I'm not sure what Paul Davis will do. Everyone tells Paul Davis, be specific. Be specific. Tell us what you're going to do. Any real political consultant who gave that advice should be fired immediately. Paul Davis should be specific enough to show that he knows what the hell he's talking about, and no more specific. What's he going to do with the Republican legislature? Go, you know, strangle Joan Waggle? Susan Waggle?
Yes.
Joan Waggle? I think there's still laws on the books about that. You know. Anyway, you know, he shouldn't be specific any more than he has to be. And all the reporters are saying this. Some of my friends who are in the commentary community are saying this, and it's just junk. Paul Davis should say enough to show that he's competent, which he already has, and then focus as much as he possibly can on Sam Brownback, because that's what the election is about. if Brownback wins, tax revenues will continue to plunge. I wasn't, I'm not going to have any, electronic aids here, no PowerPoint or anything, but you get the idea of plunging. That's what's happening. And you can say, well, we've got so much in the bank. Well, that money is going to be gone in a year, and revenues are going to continue to decrease. The two smartest people on this I know, Ed Flengy from Wichita State, Dwayne Gosen, who used to be the budget director for both Graves and Sebelius and Parkinson, both very objectively say, no question, the Legislative Research Department says the same thing. So revenues plunge, you have to make cuts. Where do we spend money? We spend money on education. Graduate school through K. K through 12 will take hits because that's the most money. Higher education will take lots of hits because we're weaker politically. So you can just count on that. You got a whole variety of other issues here. The hollowing out of the bureaucracy in the state over the last 4 years. Really competent people moving out of the bureaucracy. The privatization of public services, CanCare, for example. Those chickens have not completely come home to roost, but nothing looks very good on that front. So if Brownback is in for 4 more years, you really have, I would argue, devastating effects on Kansas policies, Kansas the population, and not to be, to find a point upon it, the winners are the top 5-7%, and certainly the Cokes. And I'm not particularly, a total Coke basher. I mean, holding them responsible for everything in the world, just some things. But you're really looking at the continuation of policies that are all headed in a really terrifically negative direction. And there's more to say about that, but let's get to the Senate race. So it's significant for Kansas, to be sure. But it's much more significant for the United States to control the Senate. Now, for me, controlling the Senate is a little overblown. So if Republicans get 51 Senate seats, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to be a little tougher on nominations. They're going to introduce some stuff which they may pass, but Democrats will basically filibuster it. If it gets through, Obama will veto it, and we'll play ping pong for the next 2 years, waiting for a presidential election that might possibly change things a bit. So the Senate, control of the Senate is really not absolutely, and certainly anyone in this room, none of us will probably be affected by who wins the Senate in 2014. Whether somebody here might get a job if Orman wins versus Roberts, but it doesn't have direct impact on it. Now, in terms of spectator sport, in terms of some broader significance about people being unhappy with the dysfunction of American government, I really think it's a kind of important race. A lot of people are looking at this and say, is this some kind of new model where you really get this unhappiness with the Congress and government as a whole, the distrust, and find some way to move that into electoral politics. So long as you've got a two-party system, it's really hard to do that. If you have something changing the dynamics, like an independent, it may have an impact. So we'll see. I think that whatever happens in Kansas, but particularly if Orman wins, you'll see national reporters making, national stories out of this. And as you'll see in a second, I'm skeptical of that. In the sense that, the other sense that it's both important and exceptional is that nobody really saw this coming. I mean, we all knew that Pat Roberts didn't come back to Kansas very much, was not very good when he came back here. But he moved farther right, one of the 5 most conservative Senate voting records. He called for Kathleen Sebelius' resignation, the first person to do it, a family friend. And you didn't see anything gathering out there on the right, and Milton Wolf pops up, not a very good candidate, and he gets 41% of the vote. And you go, Jesus, you know, he's in trouble. And the polls come out the next day and show Foreman doing well, Chad Taylor doing pretty well, and Pat Roberts in the 30s. Get a poll out yesterday showing head-to-head to Foreman 44, Roberts 34. They have no clue. They didn't see this coming. The National Republicans didn't see it coming. Just have that R behind your name in the general election, and everything's going to be fine. Maybe not. Finally, let's talk about Kobach. He really is always worth taking seriously for two reasons. First of all, he's very talented. If you don't think he's talented, you're just not paying attention. He's a very smart guy. He went to Harvard, Yale, was a Marshall Scholar, blah, 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 blah. And he has unbounded ambition. Unbounded. Now, why he didn't take Roberts on in the Senate race, to this day, I don't know. Honestly, Kobach looks in the mirror and says, geez, I'm handsome, I'm smart, I'm conservative, you know, the Tea Party people love me. Pat Roberts is this kind of shriveled old guy. Why don't I run against him? Other people have done it and done well, and I'm, of course, smarter than all of them put together. That is Kobach. I have no clue why I didn't get it. Some people might have talked him out of it, said, you know, your time will come. I just don't know. Maybe he thought he couldn't win. But, so he didn't do that. He ran again for Secretary of State, an office that he clearly believes is beneath him, since he doesn't spend much time here actually doing the job. But at the same time, he has remarkably expanded the Secretary of State's role. Essentially a non-political office that you run for in a partisan way. That's a terrible combination. Administering election laws should be taken out of the hands of a partisan elected official in any state. But it's not. And we've had a history. Bill Graves, basically an apartisan, he's Republican, but ran it in a nonpartisan way. Thornburg, before that, nonpartisan way. A little partisanship at the edges or appointments and stuff, but not in the way they ran the office. Chris Kobach is a vote suppressor. He wants to shrink the electorate in Kansas to give Republicans a better chance to win. Clearly, outside the state, he's the poster boy, crusader for anti-immigration policies. If he were here right now, he'd be exploding. That'd be great.